Thank you and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Look, we have to say this right off the bat. We're competing with an amazing panel at the same time, right? Everybody knows that. But hopefully the smaller group will also encourage us to be candid and encourage my panelists to be candid and humorous, if you like, Pak Salman, in our discussion. So my name is Douglas Ramage. I'm Managing Director of Bao Group Asia. We're an investment advisory firm. And I've worked in Indonesia for about 35 years and lived here, working on the investment climate and issues. We have a really distinguished panel here to share with us their perspective on where Indonesia is at in terms of how it's dealing with challenges facing Indonesian industrialization and the growth or the stagnation of its manufacturing sector. So let me introduce our panelists, and then we'll get down to business with some questions for each of them, and then open up for discussion with those of you here. So it's my honor to introduce first, in order, Mr. Marco Camilla. He's the UN Industrial Development Organization representative for Indonesia, Timor-Leste, and the Philippines. Marco, welcome. Good to have you with us. A little round of applause for everybody. And following Marco, the Honorable Robyn Minister for Trade, Business and Asian Relations of the Northern Territory Government of Australia. Please welcome Robyn. Following Robyn, we have Mr. Salman Subakat. Pak Salman is the co-founder of Paragon Technology and Innovation Group. Did I get that right? You recently changed the name. So a great perspective here from an Indonesian entrepreneur with his perspective on the manufacturing sector in Indonesia. Welcome, Pak Salman. Following Pak Salman, we have an extremely distinguished member of the panel. Well, you're all extremely distinguished, but we're delighted to have Ambassador Pham San Chau with us. Ambassador Pham is a distinguished former senior member of Vietnam's diplomatic corps who a year ago joined as the CEO of VinFast Asia, one of Vietnam's most exciting companies expanding into automotive and EV industry throughout Asia. And he's come to Jakarta for this meeting from his regional headquarters in India, correct? So please join me in welcoming Ambassador Pham. And finally, bringing up the end of the line, last but not least, Dr. Jose Rizal Damuri. He's the Executive Director of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. As many of you know, Indonesia's most prestigious policy research think tank. So with that, let's kind of get down to business, if we may. And we're talking about manufacturing. Indonesia's challenge is our manufacturing sector has had challenges. Our percentage of GDP from manufacturing actually continues to decline. It's less today than it was when President Jokowi took office, despite 10 years of rapidly growing foreign direct investment. So this discussion today is to focus on hopefully the policy environment in which the Prabowo administration will work. Perhaps we have some ideas for the Prabowo administration here on how we can stimulate higher quality growth and investment in the manufacturing sector. We actually have tons of investment. Why it's not creating faster growth or better investment in manufacturing, that's really a question that we'd like to ask each of you today. I'm going to mix it up. I'll start in the middle with Pak Salman. So I could direct my first question to you, Pak. As you know, President Prabowo is very keen, as was his predecessor, to court the world's best and most famous tech companies to invest in Indonesia. Across the board, all kinds of tech investment, but at the same time promoting heavy local content and domestic innovation. It seems a difficult approach. It seems difficult to get all that at once. So from your view, as the head of a company and an entrepreneur, what factors do you think will determine whether Indonesia is successful or not in attracting greater investment in high-value sectors like technology?
Okay, thank you, Douglas. First, I was joking about my English, because back then, in cosmetic industry, everyone speak broken English. Yeah, if you speak English too fluently, they will hate you. Like the French will hate you, the Italian will hate you. So if you want to be succeed in Indonesia, Pak Douglas, you should talk Indonesia more. But response to that, of course, I also a board member of ITB, is the best engineering university in Paragon. I mean, we have to refine that statement, I think. For Paragon, for example, we can create the best and I think the largest R&D for cosmetic in Indonesia. So we have like 150 scientists in all Indonesian. But if we want to go to high tech, maybe we should be selected, like maybe for data security. We cannot compete with the big giants like Google's and everything. But there's tons of company that as good as Google's can create knowledge transfers and maybe place that very like have a good university like Bandung, Yogyakarta can be the hub of that what do you call like technology office, like they can outsource so many things. I think it's the best way to do it, I think. Like yesterday they said like start with outsourcing first. I think Accenture is already create some big office in Semarang. I think there's always a way to do that. But we rarely talking about company like Accenture, Deloitte, and having like 3,000 or 10,000 people of Indonesia to be their consultant. I think that's the best way to do it right now.
So, but from your company is focused on technology.
Yep.
And the buzzword for the Prabowo government is digitalization. They want to digitize the
Yep.
whole government, and there are key digitalization officers in every branch of government.
Yep.
From your perspective in industry, how can Indonesia go about that digitalization of industry in a way also which creates more jobs rather than fewer jobs? Because we actually have the perverse problem of automation at a time we need to create higher quality jobs.
Yeah, I think it's very doable. Like we can create like so many mini ecosystem. I think like in Yogyakarta we can have a good AI talent, but it needs like 2 or 3 years to develop. This is something that rarely we talk about. If we talk about a company like Accenture, they're the one who asked to be the consultant of the development of TikTok in China. But we never talk about the enablers and not so fancy names. I think this is something that I've been working for the last for 15 months with MIT Regional Entrepreneur Acceleration Program with UGM. We have to find the strength of every region, I think. Like Yogyakarta maybe is an AI for medicine because they have a good medicine schools. And ITB will be good AI for maybe telecommunication or automation. And UI maybe is a good AI for law and everything. I think we should like, we have to break down the dream to be more specifics and be more agile or more flexible on implementation. I think this is
good. Thank you very much, Pak Salman. We can return. AI is a hot topic, of course. We can return to that
it's just a good
on.
example, but you can
example,
imagine you can have a very smart engineers in Yogyakarta only for $1,000, and then live very happy in Yogyakarta with $1,000 salary.
Maybe they're applying to VinFast Asia now.
Yes.
So thanks so much, Pak Salman. We'll come back to that also in discussion if you'd like. But I'd like to turn to Pak Yose from CSIS, maybe to kind of to tackle the elephant in the room, if you will. So Indonesia has an objective to become one of the 8 or 10 most prosperous, wealthiest, high-income countries in the world on our 100th anniversary in 2045. Yet we're also the only high-income, middle-income country in the world right now where the informal sector is actually growing. It should be shrinking. And the middle class is shrinking. It should be growing. In that context, what do we need to do? What would be your advice for the government in terms of creating a policy environment that will attract more high-quality middle-class jobs?
Well, That's what I can say. Uh, 80 million, 80 million questions, because that 80 million actually represents the number of workforce, Indonesian workforce, who work in the informal sectors. So it's 80 million, not rupiah, not dollar, but 80 million people questions. Yeah. So it is a reality, but it is often forgotten. You hit the most important question here: how to provide a high quality job. But often it has been forgotten because we try to achieve higher growth rather than just providing a high quality job. President Prabowo, with all due respect, for example, put the 8% economic growth. I think this is just an intermediate goal. It should be high, providing high quality job as the target, not being a high income country. This is just an intermediate objective to provide job as well. So going back to your questions, what kind of strategy that Indonesia needs to pursue in order to provide this quality job? First of all, we need to look at, or we need to consider, take into account our Indonesia's workforce compositions. Around 40% of Indonesia's workforce, labor force, actually only have primary school educations. Another 20% only achieve middle school education. So we could not really expect them to do high-tech job, to do sophisticated job. Therefore, perhaps one thing that we need to do is to revitalize the labor-intensive sectors. I mentioned labor-intensive sectors, not manufacturing. Not because labor-intensive, not only manufacturing, perhaps also in services, but still the labor-intensive sectors that can provide jobs to the people. Just to cite some statistic here, only 3% during the last 20 years, only 3% of investment in Indonesia actually went to labor-intensive sectors. 3% only. While the mining and metal processing sectors actually can go up to 25 or 30% of the investment. So we need to get back to these labor-intensive sectors. Of course, we still want to tap into the opportunities of high-tech, high-value-added sectors and industries, but we cannot really forget this labor-intensive one due to our composition and structures of workforce. Another strategy that we might do is to improve the informal sector itself. Why informal sector is considered to be bad? Because it provides low income, and then it has less social protection. So the policies can also be designed in order to provide more social protection. Indonesia actually already is going that way with social assistance, with the BPJS, or what you call this, health insurance schemes, public health insurance schemes, with also unemployment schemes. And we need to strengthen, we need to improve the mechanism. There are so many things that we could do for that social protection, but we have to do it, because the informal sectors could not really rely on the business sector social protection, the one that provided by the business sector or by the employers. So the state need to take care of it. Another thing is also a policy can be designed to improve the business activities of these informal sectors. by utilizing technology, by giving the chance for technology to help informal sector to reach greater market, for example, like what Pak Salman do with the groups. These kind of things like e-commerce, perhaps also ride-hailing and many other things can provide that kind of activities. So the informal sector itself need to be reduced, but still those who are in the informal sectors need to be lifted up. Their welfare and their well-being need to be lifted up, and policies actually can do it.
So if I could just, one aspect of your answer about Jose, some of you in the room might remember that President Jokowi felt that Indonesia would benefit from companies' decisions to shift some of their manufacturing as companies wanted to diversify out of China, that they would shift that manufacturing, which was the large-scale job creation in factories, that some of that would shift from China to Indonesia. Indonesia got almost none of it. It went to Vietnam, it went to some Philippines, even to Thailand, which has so many political problems. They still went there. Why is that, Jose? Why did Indonesia, I mean, you could almost say we failed spectacularly in Jokowi's 10 years to attract any of that manufacturing investment that was leaving China, going elsewhere in Southeast Asia, didn't come here. Why not?
Yeah, I think you know the answer, Douglas. Because we've been discussing about that issue, the issue of business climate, the issue of investment climate that we still need to improve. And although the last 10 years, President Jokowi really eager to improve the business climate and investment climate, including also by introducing the job creation law. For example, or before that, there were 16 economic packages to improve the business and investment climate. Still, in practice, it didn't really. They were not really effective. Yeah. Last week, I think the World Bank launched the Be Ready index for that replace the ease of doing business. And there are so many interesting informations where Indonesia can improve. Just one example, striking examples from that launching. Actually, it took 65 days for a business to get the license or to open up business here in Indonesia, while the best practice only take 2 days to start the business. So the gap is so big. And this is where we should also pay more attention. This is just one aspect of it. There are so many other aspects that we need to improve in the future if we want to get the benefit of real allocations.
Thank you, Boss. I pushed a button, I can tell. Maybe we can come back to that in discussion. One thing I'd like to turn to Robyn Cahill from the Northern Territory, because one really good thing about Indonesia over the last decade, right? We now, our governments, our last two, our current and our former president, acknowledge, Robyn, that there is no way Indonesia can become a high-income, prosperous country without a lot more foreign investment. It's impossible. So it's a very welcoming environment. And you're visiting us here, promoting commercial and investment linkages between the Northern Territory in Australia and Indonesia. So very keen from your perspective, what opportunities are there for your companies? And perhaps more importantly, because we want to have, what can we do better? What changes or what additional policies would attract even more Australian, especially companies and industries based in the Northern Territory, to Indonesia to invest here or to have stronger commercial relationships?
Thank you. So for those of you who don't know, so the Northern Territory is one of our Australian states and territories. We operate independently of our central government, so that gives us an opportunity to look for opportunities in investment and engagement with our external neighbours, independently of what the Australian government does, which is one of the reasons I'm here. So it's interesting, Douglas, we share a lot of the challenges in the Northern Territory that Indonesia is currently facing. So as a very small jurisdiction, there's only 250,000 people living and working in the Northern Territory, but we have a very big landmass. So we're about 3/4 of the size of Indonesia. So we have lots of space, we have lots of places where we can grow and develop business, but we have a very small population. But we're very fierce about our nation, our place in our nation. And I think that's one of the benefits that Indonesia has as a population, has a fierceness for progressing Indonesia that is really starting to flow through in the policy development under President Prabowo, that real focus on how do we cover the gamut of we've got products we can export and sell, but how do we make sure that that then flows through and benefits our population? And that's certainly something that we're facing. So I think you ask about what the obstructions might be. In actual fact, I think we're probably a little more difficult to deal with at the moment than Indonesia has been. I must say I've found it very welcoming, and that's potentially because the relationship between the Northern Territory and Indonesia goes back centuries. So Indonesia was trading with our Indigenous people long before Europe discovered Australia. So there is a very, very strong connection, and we view our Southeast Asian neighbours, in particular Indonesia, as very, very close friends and very good partner in developing our businesses. So I think probably the biggest challenge is around us understanding what is required to do business in Indonesia and making sure that we understand what we need to do to welcome Indonesian investment and reverse, and what we can offer Indonesia as well as what Indonesia can offer us. So one of the areas that we're looking at, which is a little bit outside of what you might think is the ordinary places for investment and exporting, is in international education. We understand you talk about the challenges around your population and education and getting kids to school and finishing primary school. We actually have those challenges as well. So in some of our communities, school attendance is as low as 10%. 10%. So if you've got a population that's not actually attending school, you've got some real challenges. So I think we have the opportunity to do some exchanges in that space about encouraging our children into school and making sure they see the value and that their parents see the value of progressing that education. So international education is a really strong focus for us as both a skill exchange between Northern Territory and Indonesia, but more particularly for Indonesia coming back into Australia. So we have programs that we're looking at, for example, where we might encourage your nurses to come into the Northern Territory and work in our health sector to see what we do and how we might do things that can benefit the Indonesian population as well. So we have a very, very strong approach to development of our economy, which also fits in with Indonesia's agenda. So I'm actually here this week. We've signed a memorandum of understanding with the Indonesian government, the first of its kind in Australia, on critical minerals and strategic supply chain. So we are leading the field. Indonesia and the Northern Territory are leading the field in this sector, and we will be inviting a number of businesses from Indonesia and government representatives to come to the Northern Territory in the middle of the year, but I will be back with businesses to show them what Indonesia has to offer. And I think making it easier for those businesses to come on board, you talk about the delay of getting processed licenses and so on, that can be very frustrating. So I think we all have something to learn in that space. Certainly the Northern Territory has had some major, 65 days actually sounds pretty good to me. We've had projects delayed for up to a year and 2 years with some of our processes, so perhaps we've got something to learn from Indonesia in that space. But I think really what we have is two environments that are really on the brink of something very exciting, and looking at our supply chains from extracting your product out of the ground, if you're talking about minerals, to the product that lands on a consumer's table. There are opportunities for us to have that sustainability within our own environments, as well as looking to getting some of those services from outside of our environment. So I think there's a real synergy between what's happening within the Northern Territory and Indonesia that will benefit both of our populations and provide opportunities.
Robyn, you mentioned to me beforehand about the excitement around critical minerals, right? And I think this is where there's a lot of potential exchange. As you know, Indonesia is extremely keen to diversify its relationships in the whole kind of critical mineral supply chain. A lot of lessons to be learned from Australia and from the Northern Territory on critical minerals. Do you envision the MOU kind of moving into kind of concrete mutual investment and trade directions as well? Can you say anything about that at this stage?
Without going into too much detail, but I will make note of the fact that VinFast have recognised that the Northern Territory is somewhere that they want to do business. They already have an office there. They have people on the ground who are working with us. So we very, very, very clearly are sending a message that we want to do business with our Southeast Asian neighbours. I know we're part of Australia, but we don't really feel truly Australian. We're much closer to Asia. It's a couple of hours flight to Denpasar. I'm working really hard to get a direct flight from Darwin to Jakarta because I think that will open up some possibilities. We're very excited. Most anybody who's actually spent some time in Bali knows how much Australians love Bali, but we want them to bring that love into Indonesia. So I think there absolutely is an opportunity for us to be seeing on the ground those growth of the business. And we're already having, with the Critical Minerals MOU, we've got a working group in place. We had some very good meetings yesterday. I won't go into all the details, but all I'm going to say is watch this space because I think you'll see a burgeoning outcome between our two governments in the very near future.
Very exciting. Thank you so much, Robyn. And a perfect segue into turning the floor over to Ambassador Pham as CEO of VinFast Asia. I think that your company is generating a lot of excitement in Indonesia. Your investment already visible on the streets with your cars and their distinctive colors in the taxi business that you have as well. But the big news, I think, Ambassador, is that VinFast is building a new EV, like electric vehicle assembly plant in West Java, and you will begin operation and production this year. It's an extraordinary development, Vietnamese company entering the EV automotive market in Indonesia. I think we'd be fascinated to hear from you, Ambassador, how in your company's strategy, why did you come to Indonesia? What makes this a strategic production base for you?
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. To answer that question, I want to mention a number of reasons. The first reason is that VinFast is a subsidiary of one of the 24 subsidiaries of Vingroup. And for VinFast, the Vietnamese market is getting smaller and smaller. So we need to go out, like Korean Chambo. So in order to be successful globally, we need to go global. So that is the first reason. Because we have become the car number one in Vietnam. We continue to be that car in the next a long time. The gap between us and the second car maker is getting bigger and bigger. And within few, we plan to be car number one in 2028, but we could make it in the year 2024. Within 3 years since we shift from ICE to EV. So when we go to global, the third reason, which destination we choose. So we have been now operational in 16 countries. And we decided to choose 3 big countries, namely Indonesia for whole Southeast Asia, India for all South Asia and the Middle East and Africa, and North Carolina in the States for, North America and Europe. Needless to talk about another project that we are going to do with the North Territories in Australia. So why Indonesia is less about natural resources abundance, it's less about skilled workers, because we are investing in what? We are investing in technology, which is a very less intensive labor industry. We are investing in manufacturing. And why Indonesia? Because we see Indonesia a lot of similarity with Vietnam. About 2 years, 3 years, 2 years ago, Indonesia now is like Vietnam 2 years ago. And we want to copy the successful model that we built in Vietnam in Indonesia. And what is that successful model? What is the reason to make it successful? Because we want to build a whole ecosystem. Unlike other EV manufacturing company, OEM, they just want to produce the car and sell the car. We don't sell the car, we sell the whole ecosystem. We sell the whole lifestyle. What does it mean, the whole ecosystem and the whole lifestyle? We want to build the beautiful dream of making the planet greener and making Indonesia greener, less polluted. And in order to do so, we want to install in the mind of everybody that you have that responsibility. And how to do that? You need to engage in an ecosystem of green energy. And that green ecosystem starts with what? Start that you have to mobile in EV. And in order to commit in EV, you need to have one infrastructure. That's why we signed an agreement with Prime Group based in Dubai to invest tentatively here in Indonesia 100,000 charging stations. Cost about 1.2 billion US dollar. So the building in infrastructure, number one. Number two, we built our factory. First stage, 200 million US dollar for 50,000 units capacity. We are ready to expand to 150 and 300,000 capacity for the next stages. And thirdly, we want to invest in the 500 workshops. So we want that with every 10 kilometers, you will see a charging, electrical charging in Indonesia. And every 20 kilometers, you will see a service, repair the car. So only with that ecosystem, people don't have anxiety of range. People don't have the anxiety of repairing the car. And then with our taxi sign, we educate the people that you don't understand about ecosystem, just drive the Sang SM. You go, you feel very comfortable, no essence, and it moves very comfortably under the water, because it's battery. It's like submarine. And then it's very friendly, environmental friendly. So we start with building the infrastructure. We start with the ecosystem mission. We call our mission is a devotion mission, noble mission. And we need to educate the people. And the most easily thing is to educate the people is just to drive in. We invest hugely also in our thousands of taxi in order just to educate people. So that is that is the reason why to come here. And a little bit political, because I come from political background. This year, the two countries celebrate 70 years of friendship and diplomatic relations. So our two countries, Indonesia and Vietnam, become natural partners since day one. When we get independence in August 1945, Indonesia is an older brother for us, just by 2 days when you declare independence. So we want, it does not come from the original planning, but it happened to be, if we want to contribute to 8% growth of Indonesia, VinFast has to be there. Because VinFast has contributed tremendously to the realization of 7.9% growth of Vietnam last year, 2024. And we are determined to contribute to the 2-digit growth for Vietnam as determined by our leaders for the next 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. It's an astonishing story. I imagine there will be questions for Ambassador Pham after this, but I do have a follow-up, Ambassador, two points to it. One is more of a comment. Your strategy of using the taxi fleet with the highly recognizable vehicle is brilliant, and I don't know, some of you might have seen the articles in Indonesian business media and CNBC and Kata Data. It's heavily remarked upon. So full marks on that strategy. But what more could you have all you need in terms of the government support for this it's a very ambitious investment? Is there, you're a lifelong diplomat, so I know you use the right language, but is there more that the Indonesian government could do to accelerate this investment plan that you have?
Yes, I wish I would, could be, we could enjoy more. I give one example. In India, I also in charge of India. I run Indonesia market from New Delhi. In India, they have federal government incentive. They have state investment incentive. And at the government, they have invest in India agency, which is one-stop agency at the federal level. And in the state, they have SIP guidance, which is one-stop level for investment for the state of Tamil Nadu. Here in Indonesia, I don't find that. My staff and I keep running around from various ministries to get this license, this permit, this license, this permit, kicking back and forth, kicking back and forth. Although everybody are very supportive and nice. But nice and supportive is not enough to achieve 8% growth. Thank you.
So I think when this panel, we should end 5 minutes early so that Ambassador Pham can rush to the other panel and meet Pak Rosan and ask our Minister for Investment, who is in charge of incentives. That's very interesting. So to kind of wrap up our first round of questions before we open to the audience, let me turn to Marco Camilla from UN and ask you, Marco, we were discussing this a little bit on the break earlier, but it's a little bit tied to the first question to Pak Jose. Indonesia is breaking investment records, where it's a year-on-year double-digit growth, in that sense, kind of looking a little bit like Vietnam. We're finally getting this growth, but unlike Vietnam, we're stuck at 5%. So in your assessment, what kinds of policy shifts or structural reforms should Indonesia consider or what changes in the composition of foreign direct investment can propel the much higher growth that Indonesia wants and deserves and has set an objective for 8%? Over to you.
Thank you, Douglas, and thanks the organizer for having me. So I want to start with a point. And the point is that we are all talking about the 8% growth. And in order to have 8% growth and reach Golden Indonesia in 2045, to be a high-income country, we will need to grow not just occasionally 8%, but it has to be continuously over the next 2 decades. And this is not easy. We have had the 1997 economic crisis, then the housing crisis that also hit Indonesia, and then the COVID. So we cannot just make sure that in 20 years we are not going to have a major crisis or disruption, but it's necessary in order to reach Golden Indonesia. But one of the requirements in order to grow 8%, according to UNIDO research, is that at least 25% of the GDP share is manufacturing. And so we need to reach this. Now we are in 20%, and it even has been decreasing in the last year. So that's something, I don't have the answer to this, but this is something we need to reach. There is a debate, an ongoing debate on the merits of services. And of course, services has been not well addressed in the past. I think it's necessary. It's also a source of jobs and good jobs in many times, but not necessarily is going to provide the productivity that we need in order to reach the 8%. There is a Harvard economist, also Danny Roderick, that is talking about the fetishism of manufacturing. I think this is more related with the US economy. We have to be serious on manufacturing. Now, how to improve manufacturing? Because what we have to do in order to improve manufacturing is to increase productivity. Productivity in new areas or productivity in the traditional areas. So the industrial sector in Indonesia the total is 50%. So that's comprising manufacturing, services, construction, education, health. Manufacturing is 20%. That Now what we need is what is the space? And actually the traditional playbook was to apply the East Asian strategy. Yeah? And we don't have this strategy. This strategy is not feasible anymore. Japan, Singapore, East Asia, South Korea. So this is not possible. Now with the US implementing policies, we are going to see very soon reorganization of production networks that is uncertain right now. But we have China also that is closing the space for high tech manufacturing. And so we don't have this space. So one of the Chinese speakers yesterday talked about leapfrogging. And I think this is the answer. But this is the answer in terms of general policies, not in terms of the details. So we have to think about leapfrogging. Leapfrogging means that we have to increase productivity faster than competitors, probably faster than, not just of neighbor countries, but faster than China. So I don't know how to reach this, but this is something we seriously have to think about. Now, how to do this? Based on recent experience of policies that we have researched at UNIDO, it's a combination of three things. So I'm extremely simplifying this, but one is to improve the absorption capacity of large companies and SMEs, absorption capacity of new technologies. So if Indonesia is receiving SDI and is receiving and is serious on advancing on downstreaming, it needs to be able to receive, to trickle down this technology. And the second is on digital transformation that is crucial in order to improve productivity. So there is not going to be industrial development, accelerated industrial development without AI applications. So we know that. And the third is something that also there is a lot of work to do is in the area of entrepreneurship and startups. That's also the answer to provide digital services we have seen in other countries, particularly North Africa, but places in South America. So I think this is something we can bring. And I want to mention just a couple of things in the area of informality. I think this is closely related with the quality of the urban planning and the cities. That's something we have to address. So it's not just legislation or it's not just specific particular policies, but it's the quality of the cities that are not productive. And that's why those cities produce informality. Yeah? And one additional point on Australia, I think Australia is a very good example of soft policies, particularly legal framework. Legal framework allowing investment to come to the country in a predictable way. I mean, this is another that is we call the invisible requirement for trade policy and for productivity.
A couple of really important things. The last point you mentioned is actually in the front of mind of every foreign investor in this country. Legal framework, legal certainty. And I don't know yet if we see kind of, an awareness of that yet from governments recently. So important point you made at the end. The question I have though for you, Marco, follow on and from perhaps UNIDO perspective or research, Indonesia's industrialization and manufacturing policy seems to rely heavily upon increasing requirements for higher local content. I think every country in the world has local content requirements of some type. But do we have the formula right here, or do you have any research or advice or guidance that can help ensure that Indonesia achieves its objectives of greater added value domestically, but in a way which is commercially viable, which doesn't scare away investors?
Well, recently I visited the two industrial parks in Sulawesi, IMIT, and Iwit in Maluku. Yeah? The nickel refining processing industrial parks, and very interesting that they show me they are advancing on the intermediate steps to produce nickel. So not just nickel, but refining nickel. This nickel matte that is used to produce steel, but also is a previous process to produce EV batteries. And they are going to sell this to Korean companies. So there is a joint venture, Hyundai LG, and they will be able to produce, I think, EV batteries very soon. But also, they have these plans to produce prototype of EVs. I mean, they are advancing on this. So that was very impressive. Now the question is, to what extent this is going to, again, trickle down to Indonesian companies, and is it not just a major Chinese venture or French, because there is also French capital, there is some Japanese capital as well in this. Yes, and I think for this, what is needed is that, again, is that Indonesian companies are able to absorb this technology. So it's not just the SDI. SDI, of course, welcome. But SDI has to come and has to create and nurture so this capability. So this is the big question.
If I may, Douglas.
Yes.
Just
Of course.
intervene for
Please. No, good, that's better.
a half minutes on the local content,
Please.
local content ones. I think we Indonesia needs to change the perspective on local content. Indonesia put a lot of emphasis on how to increase the percentage of local content. Yeah, so the thinking framework is that how to increase from 30% to 40% or 50%. But what matters actually is the amount of the local content itself. For 50% of 100, it's only 50. But 20% of 1,000 is 200, much higher than 50%. So currently our policy stuck on the percentage requirement rather than looking at from the whole perspective. And we need to change it. A lot of cases and examples from all over the world show us that if we don't really focus on the percentage of the local contents, but rather we try to increase the amount of or the production itself, then the local contents will increase.
Yeah, I mean, any of you follow the iPhone saga lately? iPhone 16 is not sold in Indonesia. I think you must have this in mind. Even Ambassador Pham mentioned the challenge that Apple has here. I think perhaps maybe this kind of thinking a different way to approach local content, right? Because the iPhone has no global supply chain to make the device itself here, but there's lots of other ways that Indonesia can participate and add value, right? So super complex. We have about 15 minutes for questions. I see that Salman is eager to say something. I wonder if you might, I'll let you jump in here, and then could we open up for any questions or comments? A lot of hot, and I see Ibu Dewi first. I will start with Ibu Dewi. But Pak Salman first, and then any other questions, please.
Okay. Maybe if I share, Paragon is the power of not knowing. We don't know that it will be so hard to compete with Unilever and L'Oreal. Even the government sometimes forgot to give us incentive. They give incentive more to L'Oreal than to Paragon. But we'll do it anyway, because they create like foreign investment, but we also invest in Indonesia, right? But it's okay. So I think you have to start like, stop thinking about all the numbers, pick some little numbers, like Indonesia love Indonesian brand so much. This is some numbers that we pick. It's very important to us, and then we prove it. We can sell higher than L'Oreal brand. And then we becoming kind of like the shadow of Indonesia. Sometimes we stop to forget some not so good numbers and focusing on what works. And it's Indonesia. you can have a, because back then, you know, Douglas, nobody wants to compete with L'Oreal and Unilever, right? They buy so less COG, they pay so less on TVs and everything, but we don't know about it, so we just start.
Well, you've done a remarkable job and good input for the government, I think. So, turn our audience, Ibu Dewi Fortuna Anwar, please.
Yeah, thank you, Douglas. I've really enjoyed the discussions. You know, when Pak Jokowi first became president, you know, his focus was very much on ease of doing business. All of the regulations, you know, the bureaucratic reform, just very focused on that. And in fact, Indonesia did achieve some, you know, amazing ranking. But at the end, as Douglas said, you know, we lost out to Vietnam over various things. That, you know, we have talk about this for a long time, that Indonesia has so many bottlenecks. Infrastructure is one issue. Then the inconsistent regulation, especially when we have decentralization. But then you said, India has federal systems, which is even more complicated, but they can manage it. Thirdly, we have, poor level of STEM achievement. So the absorption capacity for technology is limited. But one thing that I've not heard, which used to be, Douglas, you used to be an expert on this. The high cost Indonesian economy was because of rent capitalism, where making it difficult is one way of, extracting licenses. That's where corruption happens. None of you has mentioned that. That's very interesting. So, I mean, we are no longer suffering from that curse.
And the room goes quiet. It's a great question. Any of our panelists care to touch on the issue of corruption in governance? I knew we could
Maybe
count.
I just to start the discussion actually on this issue. Not all the corruptions actually comes in front as a forms of bribery or even taking the budget embezzlement and as well as the budget from the budget. The distortions from the budget, but often it also comes from the what you call this, the policy, especially related to trade. Trade policies are always the one that that is very sensitive toward corruptions. And I have to mention some statistic here. One of the source of corruption actually, when we're dealing with the trade statistic, is the licensing on import. Now in 2014, when President Jokowi started his period, actually only around less than 15% of our imported products need to have licensing. The rest has the so-called automatic licensing. By 2017, it raised to 30%. Actually, President Jokowi already called for streamlining of this licensing. Yeah. He also realized that this is one of the source of corruption, one also the source of inefficiency in the economy. But it keeps rising after that. Nowadays, it's around 70% of it. Yeah. 60 to 70%. So we, unless we could try to simplify this licensing program or licensing schemes, mechanisms in the on trade and import, we could not really get rid of this kind of corruptions, because this is one source of corruptions and one source of rent-seeking activities as well as inefficiencies.
Yes, please. Pastor Pham.
Yes, I just want to add two things about local content. In India, there is no regulation about local content for an investment. Whereas here, for VinFast, we have to meet the 50% local content requirement. Only in India, if you increase the local content, you get incentive. If you don't increase, that you don't get incentive, simply. The second thing is that about regulations, we want, as of now, we have invested in 100 charger point. If you travel around, and in next month we complete 1,000 charging point in Indonesia. We aim 50,000 this year. But one of the challenge for us is that regulation again. If we invest in one charger, we have to make a deposit of 10 billion rupiah for one charger. Let's say if we want to develop 100,000, then it's around some thousands of trillions of rupiah. So we have raised that point to the minister, Rosan, and he said, okay, he'll look into that. But you see that, because they say that they are afraid that we don't pay the bill, electricity bill. But if 10 billion rupiah for one charger, how can we afford? And then this encourages us to invest. So just two examples. Thank you.
Someone want to address the question on corruption or
So
governance?
on that whole issue of challenges around local content, regulations, multiple processes for the one thing that you need to do, we've faced that challenge as well. So we have a very strong focus on you have to have local businesses involved in what you do. You have to make sure that you employ a certain percentage of local people. So it does occasionally put up a barrier. And when you put barriers up, it does encourage people to look for ways around that. So one of the things that we've done in the Northern Territory is we've created a new office, which is called our Territory Coordinator. And that person's job is to make sure that we don't see that duplication, that where there's regulations that cross over 4 or 5 different departments, so you're repeating processes, it takes too long to achieve what you're after, and there's not a coordination point, that will remove that, so that businesses who come to do and invest in the Northern Territory will know that there is a body that's keeping an eye on that, for example, we have our central government who has its own set of rules, particularly when you talk about investments in the environmental space. So we're saying, well, if you meet all of the guidelines for the central government, and that is the equivalent of what we require as the Northern Territory government, you don't have to do that again. So that's one of the ways to actually reduce those lag times in getting licenses and having that one-stop shop. We really found that that's being very well received, and it's encouraging that growth in business and investment that also will downstream for us.
Anyone else care to actually, but Marco got close to it. He mentioned legal framework, which is the polite phrase for perhaps. Did you want to address David's question or on corruption as it relates to foreign investment? I mean, as an obstacle, you raised. I mean, raised a really important question. Or take a pass. He's going to take a pass. Well, I'm going to take the liberty of moderator, and we have 5 minutes left to say, David, wearing my hat as the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Indonesia the last several years, what I can say genuinely is that we felt the impact of some of the regulatory reforms of removing opportunities for day-to-day corruption that bothered businesses. And there's no question that foreign executives cite less often corruption as an obstacle to investing in Indonesia. So there's been, I think, a clear improvement, but it's very sector specific. And this is where the rub comes in to where we're at right now in 2025. So pharmaceutical, medical device, ICT, data centers, services, the world's best companies can do business in these sectors to, I think, the highest ethical and good governance standards in Indonesia, and full marks to Indonesia for allowing that and for ensuring that happens. We move to different sectors, natural resources, and it's, I think, a different situation. Manufacturing, a different situation as well, where we see these issues. And I wish that our companies, and I think in private they do, but the issue of legal framework gets to this. So it's still there, but it has receded somewhat for some critical areas where we've seen huge increase in foreign investment, but a persistent and maybe increasing concern perhaps in those related to natural resources. We have organizers, we have a couple of minutes left. Here's we're at 2 minutes. Is there any pressing question from the audience that we missed? Here's the guy in charge, actually, it's not me. If not, we turn it over to our MC. Before I turn to MC, I'd just like to thank all of you. Very stimulating discussion. I think we probably had the better panel, although the superstars are somewhere else. But thank you all so much. I really appreciate Marco, Robyn, Pak Salman, Ambassador Pham, and Jose. Thank you all so much for joining us, and a big round of applause.
What an insightful discussion we've just had, ladies and gentlemen. Please give a warm round of applause for our speakers and also moderator. Thank you very much for bringing this crucial topic. And before you leave the area, maybe we would like to invite Bapak Rifki as a Director of Strategy and Administration, Indonesia Business Council, to please deliver a memento as a token of appreciation for all the speakers and also the moderator. And now, for the first memento will be delivered to Marco Camia as the UN Industrial Development Organization representative for Indonesia, Timor-Leste and Philippines, and Robyn Cahill, Minister of Trade, Business and Asian Relations for Northern Territory Government of Australia, and Salman Subagat, co-founder of Paragon Corp, Pan San Chao, CEO of VinFast Asia, and Yusir Rizal Damuri, Executive Director at Center for Strategic and International Studies, and of course, the last but not least, Douglas E. Ramaj, our moderator, as a founding and managing director of Power Group Indonesia, Asia Indonesia. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please gather around because this is time for us for the photo opportunity. Please show your best smile in the count of 3 in 1, 2, and 3.